When the gentleman sought the views of the writer on what he had remarked, the writer gave his frank opinion without mincing words or without any hesitation. He criticized the English by highlighting the vices that they have got. Earlier, the gentleman had blindly praised his own country, that is England, to the sky. But the writer told him that he begged to differ from, because the writer thinks that other European countries have got their vices and virtues, good points and bad points, strong points and weak points. Similarly, the English too have their virtues and weaknesses. While giving his opinions, when he began to speak to the company of gentlemen, I could easily notice that all of the company began to look at me, began to regard me or consider me with a jealous eye before I had finished my answer. So the moment I started speaking, everybody eagerly listened to me to know what I was going to say. And everybody looked at me with a jealous eye before I had finished my answer, but which I had no sooner done. So, as soon as I gave my opinions, then the patriotic gentleman, the gentleman who ran down other European countries and praised his own country, that is England, observed with a contemptuous sneer. He did not appreciate what I said. He expected me to agree with him as others in the company did. But when I gave him my views, which differed from his, he got angry, and the patriotic gentleman observed with a contemptuous sneer, contemptuous, despicable sneer, a mocking smile. So he looked at me contemptuously and smiled at me sarcastically. In a mocking manner, he smiled at me. He looked at me contemptuously with a very bad smile on his face, and then he said he was greatly surprised how some people could have the conscience to live in a country which they did not love. In reaction to my statement, the gentleman clearly said that he was greatly shocked, astonished, surprised how some people could have the conscience atmasakshi, how people could have the conscience to live in a country which they did not love. So, what is the gentleman trying to say? The gentleman is trying to say that the writer who did not agree with his views on England and other European countries does not love his country. He is not patriotic because he highlighted some of the evils of the English. So he says he was greatly surprised how some people could have the conscience, a person's moral sense of right and wrong, atmasakshi, the sense of knowing what is right and wrong. And he is saying how some people who do not love their country live in it. And he continues saying how they can enjoy the protection of a government to which in their hearts they were inveterate enemies. Now look at this writer. The writer is a man who does not love his country according to the gentleman. Then he goes on to say that how he can a man like the writer who doesn't love his country enjoy the protection of a government to which in their hearts they were inveterate strong, very, very strong enemies. So the gentleman is trying to accuse him of being non-patriotic, and he wonders how he can live in a country which he doesn't love, and how he can enjoy the protection of a government which he hates. So he says they were inveterate enemies of the government which gives them protection. One person lives in a country which he doesn't love. The same person enjoys the protection of a government which he hates. How can somebody do it? So the gentleman is very, very angry with the writer for expressing his frank views on what he had remarked. Finding that by this modest declaration of my sentiments, I had forfeited the good opinion of my companions and given them occasion to call my political principles in question, and well knowing that it was in vain to argue with men who were so full of themselves, I threw down my reckoning and retired to my own lodgings, reflecting on the absurd and ridiculous nature of national prejudice and prepossession. By this humble expression of my sentiments, views, I had lost the good opinion of my companions till I made the statement. Everybody appreciated me, everybody gave me so much of respect, but the moment I made the statement, I lost their faith in me. I had forfeited the good opinion of my companions. Earlier, they used to look at me, they used to treat me with a lot of respect, but now everybody in the company hates me because I highlighted the vices of the English and pointed out the virtues of other European countries, unlike the gentleman. Now, the writer continues to say that I have given them occasion. The writer has given them here, other gentlemen, an occasion to challenge, call my political principles in question. So, what has happened? After making the statement, he loses the faith of other companions in him, and he also, by doing this, he also gives them a chance to challenge his political principles. So his principles stand challenged by everybody in the company. Next one. And well knowing that it was in vain useless to argue with men who were so very full of themselves. Realizing that, well knowing that, knowing very well that it was useless to argue with men who were so very egoistic, so very full of themselves, those who are very, very proud of themselves, those who are highly egoistic, those who think that what they say alone is right. See, these gentlemen are highly egoistic. So I felt that, the writer felt that it was useless to continue to argue with these men because they would never accept his differing views. So, what does the writer do? Knowing this, I threw down my reckoning my opinions, views, and retired to my lodgings. Retired, went back to my own lodging, reflecting, thinking on the absurd, meaningless, and ridiculous, silly nature of national prejudice and bias prepossession. So the writer goes away from the room in which the gentlemen are seated because he has understood that he has lost their faith in them. And he also understands that his political principles are being challenged now. And he also realizes that it is useless to argue with such men who will never see, who will never understand objective approach. So, what does the writer do? Realizing this, he throws down his reckoning, he he gives up his ideas and goes back to his own lodging. And while going back to his lodging, he is busy thinking about the meaningless and silly nature of national prejudice and bias, prepossession, prejudice or bias. So, he's seriously thinking about the ridiculous nature of national prejudice and prepossession. When a man is highly prejudiced, he will never see the truth. He will be always biased in his approach. So these gentlemen are highly prejudiced, prepossessed in their approach, so there is no use in talking to them. That's why he goes away from the room. Next part is talking about the philosophers of ancient age. He says, among all the famous sayings of antiquity, there is none that does greater honor to the author or affords greater pleasure to the reader, at least if he is a person of a generous and benevolent heart, than that of the philosopher who, being asked what countryman he was, replied that he was a citizen of the world. Today, we have so many sayings which have come down to us from earlier generation, from the past, and we will hand over these sayings to the next generation, and such sayings will always remain in the world, because from one generation it gets passed on to the next generation. There are so many sayings. So the writer says now that among all the famous sayings of the past, antiquity, ancient age, there is one that seems to be, that appears to be the greatest, that does greater honor to the author who wrote this, who said this, who came out with this saying. And he says, the saying that we have got from the past does great honor to the author, and it efforts gives greater pleasure to the reader. So it does two things. Now he's referring to one saying. There are so many sayings, and he's talking about one of the sayings which we have got from our past, from our ancient age. And he says, this saying, which I like very much, does the greatest honor to the author, and also gives the greatest pleasure, happiness to the reader, provided the leader is a man of kind and benevolent kind heart, highly generous and benevolent heart. See, author is a great man, there's no doubt. Now, the statement that he has made does the greatest honor to the author. That means this saying came out of the mouth of the greatest philosopher. And his saying efforts gives the greatest pleasure to the reader, provided the reader is a person of kind heart, generous, magnanimous, benevolent, kind heart. If he's a man of generosity, benevolence, definitely he'll get great pleasure reading this saying. It seems a philosopher in the past was asked which country he belonged to. A philosopher who lived in the ancient age was asked by somebody which country he belonged to. Look at the question. A philosopher who being asked what countryman he was, that means which country he belonged to. This was a question put to him by somebody. And what was the reply of the philosopher? He replied that he was a citizen not of one country but of the entire world. He had the generosity, he had the intelligence, he had the goodness to say that he did not belong to one particular country, rather, he was a citizen of the entire world. How few there are, now the writer observes, how few there are to be found in modern times who can say the same. Today, nowadays, you won't find any philosopher, any scholar, any human, any ordinary human being who will make the same statement. Today, you may find hardly anybody. Or out of 10 lakhs, you may find one or two. How few there are to be found in modern times who can say the same. Nowadays, in the modern world or postmodern world, you won't find many who will make this kind of a statement. Or at least, even if they don't say that, will you find a person whose conduct is in tune with, consistent agreement with such a profession? Now, the writer says it's very, very difficult to get somebody who will make this statement today. Later, he says that, let alone making the statement today, you won't find anybody who behaves, who conducts himself according to this principle. What is a principle? I am a citizen of the entire world. What is a principle here? I don't belong to one particular country, I belong to the entire world. You won't find anybody who behaves in this manner, who behaves as if he belongs to the entire world. You won't find anybody who will say that. You won't even find anybody whose conduct is consistent with such a profession. We are now become today, look at everybody, not just Indians. Today, you go to any country, you'll find that people are so much Englishmen, so much Frenchmen, so much Dutchmen, so much Spaniards, so much Germans, so much Indians, so much Pakistanis that we are no longer citizens of the world. Today in India, everybody would say that we are Indians. You go to the UK, everybody would say that we are English, we belong to England. Frenchmen, they would say we belong to France. Today, you won't find anybody who will say that I belong to the entire world. So much the natives of one particular spot. As a result, we become the natives of one small particular spot. Spot here, country. A small place. So today, think of a country like Sri Lanka. It's a small country, and the people who belong to Sri Lanka will proudly say that we are the natives of this small area, this small country. Proudly they'll say that. Or the members of one petty society, small society. And we are proud to say that we are the natives of one particular place. We are the members of one community, one petty society, one small society. We never say that, we would never say that we belong to the entire world. That we no longer consider ourselves as a general inhabitants of the globe or the members of the grand society which covers, which comprehends the whole mankind. Today, nobody will say that, nobody will consider himself, or we don't consider ourselves as the general citizen, general inhabitants. Inhabitants here, the people who live. We don't think that, we don't consider ourselves as the people of this globe here, the world, or members of a great society, the grand society, which covers, which means, which refers to the entire humanity, the whole humanity, the entire humanity, the whole humankind. Today, we do not consider ourselves as the general inhabitants of this earth or globe or this world, or the members of a grand society which comprehends the entire humanity. Nobody will say that I'm a human being belonging to this great earth. Instead, he or she would say, I'm a Pakistani, I'm an Indian.